Well, I haven't had a chance to welcome my dear co-hostess back from the four corners of the earth.
Well, I was gone for a while.
I know you were gone for a while.
I was glad to get back. You know, well, normal's good.
You look lovely as long. But I want to ask you something. You were with the gypsies, and we have romantic views of gypsies with violins and dancing and fortune telling and all sorts of exotic stuff. What did you find? You were with gypsies where? In the Ukraine?
In the western, or the western part of Ukraine. And, you know, of course, there are gypsy communities in Romania and Hungary and that whole region of the world.
Are they called Romanish people? Is that
Romas.
Romas?
They're called the Roma people.
Roma, not gypsies.
They really don't go by gypsies anymore.
Okay.
And some people call them travelers because, you know, it's sort of tradition that they, in fact, their flag has a wheel on it. They gave us their flag while we were there.
Well, what did you find?
Well, the Roma people have been kind of a displaced people for a long time. They come out of the north of India many years ago, and they really have never had a place of their own to belong. But because they've traveled a lot and not been accepted by people, there's a lot of illiteracy, tremendous amount of poverty, and it's the kind of depth of that thing that goes on from generation to generation.
Well, gambling, thieves, stealing, prostitution, all do they do all those things, or is that just myth?
Well, I think some of it's myth. There's probably some of that that's gone on. The people that we see are just living in desperate situations. You can imagine in a community with deep poverty what happens when there are special needs. What happens in a community when there's no running water? What happens when there's no school for the children to learn? Even the parents don't read and write in many instances. So we've had occasion to go in there, open schools, provide teachers for them, teach the kids to read and write. Then the parents come and say, will you teach us to read and write? There's now water in the community that I'm thinking of that had none, where they had to walk to a river 2 miles away in the summer only, no water in the winter.
Dig a well for them?
Well, what we did was we actually put in a bathhouse and toilet facilities
so
for the kids.
Clean.
So they could get clean. And the kids love it. But we have it all scheduled on certain days of the week. We're working with the barons of these communities, so very exciting. And big agricultural products, so they're learning how to grow their own food and become self-sustaining, which then, you know, really feeds into their feeling of self-value.
I want to get some video of those people and this project we're doing. That is so exciting.
Now, let me say this to you. They do dance amazingly.
Oh, do they dance?
Yeah, they've got a life and a vim and a vigor. And they're in the Christian community within the Roma culture. Yeah. People are on fire for the Lord and really love God in the midst of their need.
Play the violin?
Some do. We had a worship band that we worshiped with on Sunday that was quite astonishing.
Well, anyhow, Terry of the Gypsies.
I received that.
Well, it turns out we switched from the Gypsies to Big Brother. He really is watching you. We've learned just how widespread the government's surveillance programs are, and they're doing it with the approval of a secret court.
That has privacy advocates outraged, and some are asking the Supreme Court to step in. Jennifer Wishon has the story from Washington.
The ways we can be tracked through technology advance constantly.
It's hard for you to know all the places where the information is being generated about you.
But privacy advocates say it shouldn't have taken an information leak for Americans to learn just how widespread government surveillance is and the legal justification it uses to carry out that surveillance, like when it asks major phone service providers like Verizon to turn over its clients' phone records, all in the name of national security.
They reveal who we talk to and when we talk to and who we talk to the most.
Giving Big Brother a legal peephole into your circle of contacts. The Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, this week filed an emergency petition with the Supreme Court. The group is asking justices to dissolve an order by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which allows the NSA to collect the records of millions of phone calls made every day by Americans right here in the U.S.
And they're collecting this information, as you said, about people who, may have done nothing wrong or not be implicated in a national security investigation at all.
Here's the issue. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA, includes language that allows the government to collect business records, in this case Verizon's. But the law says the records must be relevant to a national security investigation. The problem is in interpreting that law. A secret FISA court is in charge of approving what records the government can collect. And that court is reportedly defining the word relevant very broadly in terrorism cases. So much so that experts say the government can gain access to virtually any electronic information.
The specific files requested have to be relevant to a specific investigation. Whereas what's happening right now is bulk collection of all call detail records of Americans under the theory that at some point in the future they may become relevant to some investigation.
The sheer over-collection of information on Americans right there is troubling because it's hard to see how that complies with existing law and constitutional restrictions. And then once the government has that information in its databases, there are very few limits, not enough limits, on how the government can use that information for subsequent purposes. So that raises a whole lot of potential for abuse.
Potential abuse that some fear will eventually lead to a state of constant surveillance.
It's a critical question of scope, because if the interpretation of relevance under this law is going to be some interpretation that we've never seen before in a criminal court or civil court, then the public has a right to know.
The NSA collects information in the name of national security, but Franklin says security and privacy don't have to be in conflict.
In fact, if we make sure to have appropriate standards and require the government to establish an appropriate predicate, a connection to terrorism when they're collecting information, that is actually going to make their programs more efficient. They're going to be going after the real bad guys, and it's also going to protect privacy by limiting the intrusion on the rights of innocent Americans.
For now, the government, the courts, and Americans have to figure out how much surveillance is acceptable and necessary in the name of security. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate our news department for bringing that very incisive report. But this FISA court is a joke. And the definition of relevant, everything is relevant. All the information you collect is relevant to something, sometime, somewhere, obviously. You know, the flight of the monarch butterfly is relevant to the temperature in New York sooner or later if you continue to, you know, have those little wings flapping.
Wouldn't you think that that kind of massive gathering of information would make getting to the bad guys harder and less effective?
Of course it does. And Terry, the problem is, it's very simple. Political correctness refuses to identify the real people who are our enemies. They will not identify radical Muslims as the ones who are the ones going to blow us up. And they refuse to identify it. They won't name it. And consequent, we become all suspects. You know, that Nigerian bomber, his father notified the CIA, said, my son is doing crazy things, watch him. Let him go. He winds up on a plane in Detroit getting ready to blow up his underwear. The same thing with these Tsarnaev brothers. Russians came to us and said, look, these people are dangerous. Did nothing about it. But yet we've got to surveil everybody and have little old ladies taking their shoes off in the airports and stuff. I mean, it's crazy what we're doing. And the reason is political correctness refuses to identify the enemy. We won't do it. We do not have a war on terror. The Muslims are not radical. We do not have enemies. That Major Hassan, who, you know, shouted Allahu Akbar and started shooting people, he wasn't a Muslim. He's just a misguided soldier. Yeah, sure. He was radicalized, taught radical teachings, and yet we let him get through the psychological program in the military and become a major. Unbelievable. But when are we going to wake up? But think of this massive thing, and the expenses are ungodly. But it means everything that is being said by you on the telephone or in your emails or in any text you do or your conversation, it's all going into Big Brother's database. Whew, that is scary. Let's stop it. Let's scream. Let's do something. But this is dangerous. And so that Snowden, in my opinion, becomes a hero, not a criminal. Well, to look at some people who definitely are showing their colors, and that's a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. Muhammad is our leader, jihad is the way. But they're not going to give up power in Egypt easily. And Wendy Griffith has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Wendy.
That's right, Pat. Egypt's leaders are trying to come up with a political plan for the future, and the final decision will be very important for Christians there. Chris Mitchell has our story from Cairo.
Egypt's new president set out a timetable for his political roadmap. At the same time, Muslim Brotherhood members were continuing their call for the reinstatement of Mohamed Morsi in another part of the city.
God willing, we are protesting in all squares until the return of Morsi.
While Muslim Brotherhood supporters protested, they're also refusing to join the new political process.
This fight is for the heart and soul of Egypt and the Middle East for generations to come.
Michael Munir, president of the Al Hayat Party, says Egypt's future is being determined now. He says the question is if Egypt's new constitution will be based on political Islam that drives groups like the Muslim Brotherhood.
Would political Islam be the driving force behind this whole 100 years to come, or is it going to be moderations, civil liberty, democracy, human rights, religious freedom? And this you cannot get with a constitution that's based on a religion.
Munir says the outcome of the constitution will have a huge impact on the millions of Christians in Egypt.
For the long term and for the future, and if we have the constitutions that we want to have, that respects civil liberty and religious freedom, I think the future is going to be much better for Christians.
That hope for a better future and greater freedom is why Christians took to the streets during what many people are calling Egypt's second revolution. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Cairo, Egypt.
Thanks, Chris. And that chaos in Egypt is one reason why the price of oil is rising, with concerns about oil supplies making it through the Suez Canal, which is, of course, controlled by Egypt. Oil rose to $107, and that means higher prices are coming to the gas pump. A human trafficking ring in Florida is branding women and girls who are used for prostitution. A major bust began back in May. It netted 92 arrests, among them a 15-year-old girl. Officials learned that she was part of a trafficking ring that was bringing women into counties throughout Florida to sell their bodies. The Polk County Sheriff said he was outraged when he saw markings on the girl that showed she was being treated like a slave.
In the year 2013, we are tattooing, branding children, and people are using them as consumable merchandise. And then they simply throw them away.
The Florida Attorney General is investigating. I certainly hope so, Pat.
Wendy, I am just incensed at what's being done. And the trouble is we've got to have laws that exonerate these girls. The girls are not criminals. They are not voluntarily breaking any law. They're forced to do these things. And yet so often there's a dragnet out will arrest the hookers off the streets and throw them in jail and then book them for some offense and then turn them loose. That's not the answer. The answer is major, major resources against human trafficking. We're working with the American Center for Law and Justice on this issue. The Regent University has a whole program on human trafficking. Operation Blessing is working on it, and I know Terry is working with some of these girls that are...
Well, we're actually all working together on campus here in an effort called Set Free Now, and joining with other organizations around the country. It's a big issue. It's going to take a lot of people, but we need to act now before it gets too big and too deep to make an impact.
Have you run into some of the girls you've had a chance to minister to them?
Oh, well, in other countries,
well,
yes, but what's really shocking is that it's happening here in America, like the story we just heard about Florida. You know, this is domestic trafficking. Well, unbelievable.
The girls are runaways, and the cops say, well, they're just runaways. Well, they're not runaways. They have been captured, and I remember interviewing some time ago a man who was in the Vice Squad, I think, in Chicago, and these girls were being brought in from Minnesota, blonde-headed girls, you know, and they were picked up by these pimps when they got off the bus in Chicago, and the next thing you know, they were tortured, they were beaten, they were, you know, put on the streets, and it's just, ladies and gentlemen, it's horrible, and yet 1 million women are trafficked every year around the world. 1 million people suffering, and we've got to do something about it. And that's what you read the 58th chapter of Isaiah. It's deliver those who are in bondage and oppression. Well, that's our mandate. We must fulfill that mandate. Well, Wendy's got more in the news.
Yes, I do. House Republicans have decided to embrace a smaller, step-by-step approach to immigration reform. They won't pass the comprehensive plan approved by the Senate. That bill includes measures for border security, but House Republican leaders say the White House cannot be trusted to secure the border. House GOP members have their own ideas for immigration reform, but no clear timetable for them. While having fat around your waist could be more dangerous than just being generally overweight, researchers say that having a pot belly increases the risk of heart disease and cancer. That's because weight around the waist is an indicator of fat around the vital organs. This kind of bad fat releases chemicals that raise the risk of disease.
Have to really address those risk factors that are there for heart disease and cancer. You know, again, your dietary intake, your exercise, your weight, all those important factors are really critical in how your overall health is.
The study was published online in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, so apparently, Pat, it's okay to be pleasantly plump but not have a pot belly.
Well, you don't have that danger, but I don't know. We've had studies about this, but the trouble is this fat rests on top of the muscles, so you can do all these crunches and all these squats and all these exercises, and your muscles get stronger, but that layer of fat hangs on top of it. So what do we do to get rid of the fat? We've had, there are all kinds of medicine programs to take that fat off.
And energy burning, or not energy, but fat burning foods as well. So we tell it all here. We've got good medical reporters here that are on top of it.
I'm a great fan of green tea extract.
I know you are.
Triple strength green tea extract. You can get it at the health food store, and that is thermogenic. It starts burning, and I guess it burns fat everywhere. But you lose a lot of stuff if you want to do it. Green tea, triple strength extract. Little pills, 3 of them a day.
The Army major on trial for the massacre at Fort Hood says he supports the Taliban and Islamic Sharia law. Nidal Hassan is accused of killing 13 people and wounding nearly 3 dozen at the Texas Army base in 2009. He reportedly shouted Allahu Akbar before opening fire on a crowd of soldiers. Hassan is serving as his own attorney. He questioned several potential jurors Wednesday about their ability to put aside any prejudice concerning his Islamist views. Officials in West Virginia's Wyoming County say they won't remove a 10 Commandments monument from the courthouse lawn. The American Civil Liberties Union has questioned its constitutionality. The group says government property is being used to advocate one religion over another, but the county prosecutor says it isn't. Instead, he says the monument promotes laws based on some of the commandments. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.